Okay, take the screen down, James, please. A very good morning to you all, and welcome to another Three Nations Dementia Working Group webinar. A very special one because we're going to be singing our praises on this one and talking about the success of our webinars. I'm delighted to say I'll be disappearing soon, and Duncan Jones, who you see on our screen, will take over the chairing, and we're so pleased and grateful that Duncan has taken the time out to do this for us. My name is Nigel Holler. I'm chair of the Nations Dementia Working Group, and I quickly want to say a few housekeeping things. If you have something to say, please use the text boxes, because if you hold your hands up, we won't be able to see you. And really to remind you that these webinars are designed, produced, and presented by people who with dementia, and in that terms, the uniqueness. And we'll be examining that uniqueness throughout the course of the morning. We can't deal with individual queries, but what we can do is, if you put them in the chat box, we can signpost them out for you. I just want to thank you all for turning up this morning, and that's enough from me, and I will now hand you over to Duncan, who will share the rest of the session. Good morning, Duncan.
Good morning, Nigel. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real thrill to be chairing this morning's session. When I think back on the pandemic and lockdown, one of my strongest memories is of the Three Nations Dementia Working Group webinars, which I came across after about week 3 or 4. And have stayed with off and on all the way through when I've been able to join them. This is the 65th webinar. That's an achievement in itself, and I think we should celebrate that. But since March 2020, there have been 64 different webinars on a range of issues, from faith and dementia to bereavement and dementia to things like crafting and music. So we've covered a real wide span of different topics. Aside from those who've joined the webinar live, and there've been a lot of those, almost 110,000 people have viewed it on catch up over those 2 or 3 years. That's including one statistic that really stuck with me. When we did the care, Curing the Care System webinar, 13,000 people watched that on catch up. That's an enormous amount. I wish there had been a few government ministers who joined that, because they might have learned 1 or 2 things that day. But that's the power of this webinar. It's become a part of people's lives over the last 2 or 3 years, which is great. And it's gone from strength to strength. Interestingly, though, it was set up, we were talking about this just earlier, it was set up for people living with dementia and with lived experience. But actually, 80% of the audience come from the research and the professional area. So it's become an educational tool as much as a support tool, which is great. But it would be interesting to know why so many people find it so useful and so interesting. And maybe we'll get some comments on the text box. But I'm delighted to see I've got a very esteemed panel. Hopefully you're not going to hear too much from me this morning, because that means your faces in front of you are filling up the airwaves and talking about what they've experienced over the last 2 to 3 years. So let's kick off the discussion this morning. How did the idea first come about? Whose idea was it? Who wants to claim credit for it? And how did you go about coming up with the first webinar all those years ago? Nigel.
We have to pay respect and everything else to Adele Layton, who at the time was head of Dementia Voice. She came up with the idea. She attacked it very passionately because, as you quite rightly said, when lockdown, we were all sort of wondering what we were going to do. The face-to-face out of the question, and most of it had shut down throughout the organisations anyway. And it was just, we thought, we do 2 things. We'd run these webinars and we'd run Saturday, Sunday socials, both with the element of maybe giving something to look forward to when there was nothing else in terms of, because of restrictions of service. It was uncharted territory, but with Adele's help and laterally James Erskine, And I got to say, lots of senior members within the Alzheimer's Society itself who supported us and turned up for the webinars and were parts of panels that we asked them to, doing very busy jobs, but they still turned up and gave us 10 or 15 minutes of their time, which we're incredibly grateful for. But I think we need to pay tribute to Adele. This is one of her major legacies. She started it. I don't know what the rest of you think, but it was an unknown area to us, and it wasn't something we took lightly either, because it's a huge responsibility delivering a webinar. Chris.
I totally agree with everything that Nigel said, but I also want to pay homage to Nigel as the chair of the Three Nations Dementia Working Group. He's shaking his head because he doesn't like compliments, but he's the glue that's held us all together. And yes, we are a team. And I think that hosting the webinars and taking part or even listening has given us all a sense of purpose, which was lacking certainly at the start of lockdown. And that's really important for everyone. Everybody needs a reason to get out of bed in the morning and to look forward to the day. And the webinars have certainly done that for me.
Keith.
Yes, going back to those dark and dismal days of 2020 when we were all locked down, all of our diaries were obliterated. And I look back recently at my 2020 diary, and it got cancelled consistently through end of March, through April, May, into June. And many of us were due to speak at conferences and events and be part of important pieces of work that were planned for that period. So it created a vacuum as well in our lives. And many of us were well used to standing in front of audiences or standing alongside colleagues and fellow people affected by dementia. And so this vacuum needed to be filled. It needed to be filled for us personally, but also to give us that sense of wanting to continue to contribute to the knowledge base that we'd already been contributing to, many of us, for a few years. So it was very important then, and that importance has been sustained over all the period since then.
How did you decide on the topics initially when you first came up with the idea? And I take Nigel's point and Chris's point about Nigel's contribution and Adele's contribution, but you're a team and you've all contributed in enormous ways to the success of this project. How did you come up with the ideas for what you should be talking about? Joy.
I think Julie wanted to say something.
It's okay, you've moved on now.
Okay, sorry.
So
no, Max start the ball rolling and I'll follow him.
Okay, Mac. Hello, Mac. Can you hear me?
You. Yeah, I am probably the newest member to the webinar sessions, because they have been going on quite some time before I joined. I also had the honor of actually chairing on a few occasions. And the one thing that really struck out to me was the fact that because it's run by people with dementia and it's presented by people with dementia, it highlights the fact that there is life with dementia. And there are things that we can do and we are still able to do. It's demanding, there's no doubt about it. It takes a lot out of us, but it still is delivered, I think, professionally and properly. And the audience, the people that actually watch it and the professionals that we've had on our webinars have actually contributed quite a lot. And they've agreed with the fact that it is having impact out there. I think that the biggest thing that we did was brainstorm these ideas, sit together and look at the ideas and maybe explore them prior to actually setting up a date and actually going ahead with the webinar. Thank you.
Keith.
Yeah, Mac's absolutely right. And what I'm going to say builds upon what he's quite rightly just expressed. The agenda and the list is organic and it does come from within the group. but also it comes from outside the group as well. You know, we welcome suggestions from listeners, from people who join the panels and say, well, can we do a second one on this, or can we go in a different direction next time? So there is an element of forward planning to an extent, but also there's a large element of responding to need and responding to the current situation that's happening in individuals or a collective life. And linked to that, I think there's also a great deal of democracy within it as well. You know, no one will come up with a plethora of ideas and see their ideas through to fruition. It really does come from everybody, and everybody has an equal say in what is decided upon.
Yeah, the teamwork certainly has come through. As a viewer and a regular viewer, that the sense of team has always been really, really strong. Chris, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I think that with the subjects, initially we did have to think about them ourselves, but I think what's come across really clearly, because there's a lot of professionals now listening to the webinars, is that people want to hear the voice from those of us with lived experience. We're the ones that are living with dementia every day. And yes, they can read things in textbooks and, you know, learn about medications and things. But until you've spoken to somebody actually living with dementia, you don't know how anything affects us. So we always say, you know, nothing about us without us. And I think that's proven itself with our webinars too.
Joy. And sorry, I'm going to come to Judy first this time, if that's okay, Joy.
If Joy goes first, because it's more important.
Yeah, just along those lines, really, on a personal thing, it works both ways. The webinars help other people to understand more about dementia. But for us, as already been said, for the team, it helps us as well. For me personally, just organising or helping organise these webinars has been such fun. And for me, it is about being part of a team. It's almost like a family getting together. Yeah, coming up with some of the topics in the early days was quite challenging, but my perspective is that it is comforting to know that my ideas are never going to be dismissed. And I think it's important that we listen to our listeners and what they want to engage with.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Julie, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, certainly what comes from working together with the steering group is that there's an overall respect of everybody. So as Joy was saying, whatever the input from anybody, we're not dismissed. We're not dismissive of each other. And the work is shared around fairly. And we appreciate each other's input from the different experiences that we've all had. And again, reflecting back to what Chris said, that what we've gleaned back from the professionals is that what's not missing in their practice is that they can always refer back to textbooks. They can always sort of attend in-house lectures and things. But what is missing is the easy access to Dementia Voices, to be able to get the lived experience. And with referring to the webinars, what they can do is go down the list on our website and pick out what's most applicable to their particular practice and actually tune directly in to something which they can then apply to their daily practice.
On the back of what Julie's just said, I think that we choose the subjects and topics that very often professionals wouldn't choose. and we choose topics that actually affect us, people living with dementia, and maybe sometimes some taboo subjects that people don't always want to talk about. But we can all, I think for all of us, we can say what you see is what you get, and that we're all open and we're all honest and we're upfront and we're happy to share, to try and make the lives of other people living with dementia better, and to help anyone who listens to the webinars.
I'll come to you in a second, Keith, but firstly, I want to pick up on a point that Joy made about it being fun. I remember coming to an early Three Nations Dementia Working Group, early for me, so this would be well pre-pandemic. You had a meeting in Birmingham, which Adele invited me along to, and I wasn't quite sure what to expect. I hadn't met most of you at that point, and I can't remember as much laughter in a 1 hour meeting as I experienced that day, and it was just so life affirming. And that's come across so much in the webinars as well, which is really, really positive. And I think it was Keith made the point earlier on that about it's what we can do, not what we can't do, and that's such an important thing to focus on. And these webinars have certainly done that. Keith, you have your hand up.
Yeah, the other point to make on this really important question, Duncan, that you've asked is that we don't always agree as well. You know, this is where the respect comes into it, really, because we certainly respect each other, and there is a great deal of consensus and agreement, but also there are times when we don't always agree. And sometimes that can be around the choice of topic. So sometimes we've actually parked a topic because the time wasn't quite right for us. You know, so we've thought this is an important issue to discuss and to bring to webinar, but maybe not now. Let's park it, let's look at it again, and let's revisit it within the steering group, and maybe bring in 1 or 2 professionals to talk with us before we actually then run into a webinar idea. And that has worked 3 or 4 times extremely well.
Julie.
Yes, and picking up from that, one of the issues that we did delay on was we had talked about the issues of discussing what our preferred end of life support would be. But obviously we had to be very careful about when we chose that, because we were going through a pandemic when people with dementia were unfairly being affected by COVID, and there was a huge loss of life. So we decided that, you know, there's no-go areas with us, but we had to kind of delay that until, you know, we can't really be talking about that while people are going through huge amounts of bereavement. So we did talk about it, and it was actually one of our most popular webinars. So there's no reason why we can't talk about any given subject, but it's about the timing of it, and then we can approach it in an appropriate manner.
While we're talking about the topics that we've covered so far, I wonder, are there topics that we haven't covered so far that you as a group would like to, that maybe for the reason that Julie's just mentioned, the time hasn't been right, or maybe it's just because it's just occurred to you? So what are the things, the areas that you'd like to cover that you haven't covered so far, Keith?
Yes, we've got 3 or 4 lined up for the next month or 2. And we're going to focus upon co-production being one. That's an area where, or co-creation, whichever phrase is the current vogue. But we feel, you know, we can contribute something to that. We're always aware and mindful of the importance of technology. And we have covered that before, but it moves on at such a pace that we need to respond to that movement. So there will be something in the near future, probably on that. We're also extremely mindful that care partners are crucially important in the lives of those of us who have a diagnosis of dementia. And maybe, you know, we haven't always been able to embrace that within our webinars as fully as we would wish to do. So that's an area where we certainly will address in the next near future. And the next one is actually set up for a couple of weeks' time. And the title is intriguing because the title is around diverse activities for diverse people. And read into that what you will. But basically, what we want to approach in that is the fact that we're all different, we're all unique, we're all individuals, and we all have individual needs and interests. And let's try and embrace that within a webinar and illustrate how what works for one person might not work for another person.
We haven't done a webinar for cats yet, and I wonder whether that this is kind of.
Pets,
I've done so many Zoom meetings for Alzheimer's Society over the last 3 years, and my cat, one of my 2 cats, has appeared at every single one of them, and he's looking at me now, so he may well make an appearance before the end of the webinar. Mac, I think you had your hand up for a moment there.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the good thing is this is the platform that we use actually, because that is what provides us with the place where we can voice our opinion, and majority of the time, you know, the panelists are talking to each other. We can't see the audience, and sometimes it is difficult because you know you feel like you're talking to yourself, and because we've met everybody on there and we know everybody as a member of the team, and it does take quite a lot out of us. But what I really wanted to say was the fact that we need a sat nav to go through this process, and that has been provided by the society, and somebody who chairs it, not only is he or she well in with the subject that we are, or the topic that we are discussing, they've done their homework on that topic, and that is what actually keeps it all going, and it's nice, easy flow. And you have to remember that we got a condition, and it's not easy to talk to strangers over this. And sometimes we put on the spot. But I think, again, the platform itself has cushioned the blow to the extent that I think we're so open and candid about things that ordinarily we might not talk about.
Thank you, Matt. Chris?
I think some of the other topics that we need to cover still is around diversity and inclusion, and I'm not sure if it's the right term to still use, but ethnic minorities. But when we've tried to cover those topics, and one other thing is the LGBTQ+ community. But when we've tried to cover those topics, it's been difficult sometimes to get people who are prepared to talk out about those issues. So that's another thing that we have to bear in mind. We need people on the panel who are happy to talk about these issues. And when you think in some cultures, there isn't even a word for dementia. So you can understand how some people are not happy to come forward and to share their experiences. So we're also working on that.
Nigel, Keith brought up the subject earlier about co-production, is something that's coming up in the next few weeks, and that was on my agenda to talk about today. So I'm going to use the big C word now, because co-production is a really big issue at the moment for Alzheimer's Society, as it is for a lot of organisations. This is the essence of co-production. I mean, it's almost solo production in terms of it coming from your team, with input from Adele and from James and others over the years. So what's been your secret in terms of actually driving that, and what could you teach Alzheimer's Society about co-production, do you think?
It must take place in a safe space. The agenda is set by the people around the table, not by the organizations calling them together. They must be facilitated fairly, equally, and sensitively, because not everything people say will go down well, but it's a view, it's an opinion, and it's something which must be supported, even if you are not in a position to be able to use it. Co-production it's not a word, it's a process. And this negotiated shift of power from people who run the service, for instance, to people who are in receipt of the service, and to people who are delivering the service, needs to be very sensitively approached. In Wales, nothing happens in dementia in Wales unless it's co-produced. We have evidence of that. We are committed to it. A number of us have found ourselves in a position where we can influence co-production at the highest level. You know, I advise the Welsh Government on it, and it works, because but still, what you get is you get the odd one or two decision makers thinking that it's much easier to write something and hand it down. It isn't. One of the great things about these webinars has been that we believe in them and we own them. And I personally get very, very, very upset if people either don't take it seriously or feel that it's just something they need to do. You know, the voices of people living with dementia can change hearts and minds. I've seen it. We've all seen it. And that's what we're doing, hopefully. Sorry, Julie, I overrun a little bit there.
Oh, no, you haven't. For me, it's about essentially a shift in the approach to work, whether that be by researchers or by educators or whichever organisation they're working for. So that in the past, it's very much any work undertaken around dementia has been very task-centred, task-focused, and it's around bringing it down to being about the person, and about being, by coming at it from a different angle. The task approach is to kind of come in and say, we need this doing, we need it done by a certain date, and whatever's the quickest way forward will be the most efficient. And actually in co-production, by working in this different way, which actually might take a slower, it might be a slower way forward, but the eventual outcome is so much more effective and worthwhile. It's worth far more than the traditional, if you like, ways of going about things, which could be quite tokenistic in its way of just maybe including one or two people at various points, but mostly being about the professionals taking all the decisions, forming the direction of the work and how it's going to be played out. So it's about making sure that we're there from the very inception, carrying it all the way through, how it's to be formed, the questions to be asked, the format of how things are to be put forward, and then how it's to be spread out when it comes down to the actual service delivery. And so it's that right the way through, involving us.
Joy.
Yeah, about the topics, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know how much we've covered the topic of our youngsters and the involvement that they can have, and the projects out there that can influence not just the youngsters themselves, but the staff. So we might need to revisit it, or it might be something else for us to look at.
Thanks. That's a good idea. Good idea, Joy. I'd like to just pick up on a point that Julie made there, about maybe it takes a little bit more time to co-produce things, and you have to be, you know, it's not quite the instant thing. That goes against the way we operate as a society today, where everyone is looking for instant gratification. They're looking for something to happen yesterday. And I think there's a lesson to be learned from the way that you have worked. So thanks for joining us, Keith. See you next time. There's a lesson to be learned from the way you work together as a team that actually would benefit huge numbers of people for just taking a little bit more time to think and consider other people's opinions before making decisions. And that's quite difficult in this day and age when we're expecting everything to happen immediately. Julie?
And, you know, going back to my own professional life, initially I was a nurse. And then later on, I was a social worker in older people's services. And also I've supported family members who had dementia. And so I had a certain view of dementia and a certain amount of knowledge. But there's just a certain aspect of dementia that I could never really get, that I never fully understood until I actually had it. Things were so much different from how I had imagined it, even though I thought I had a reasonable grasp of the service, of the condition. So unless you get that inside knowledge of what is it like from the inside, how might it affect someone's day-to-day life, you can't get that from viewing from the outside or by reading a textbook. So it's very, very important to get our input, and also not just to be thinking, oh, well, if we include one person with dementia, then that's it, we've been inclusive and we've been co-productive, because we're so different. Everybody on this screen is experiencing dementia in a different way, because we're all different people. So even if we have the same types of dementia, some of us, our experiences of it are very different. So it's not good enough to just say, you know, oh, it's okay, we've included Joy or Chris or Mac on our committee or on our study group, so therefore we automatically know what we're talking about. We've included people with dementia, and that's the difference in co-production.
Thanks, Julie. Chris?
Yeah, I think a lot of us on the screen today have also been involved in doing research with the universities, and they're getting so much better now at involving us at the very, very beginning, not halfway through or towards the end. And I know that universities use our webinars as a learning process. And there's no point in getting people living with dementia involved when the process is nearly finished. And it's been really good for myself. I've been involved in quite a few research projects, which is co-production. And the way forward with that is that we've written a best practice on how to co-produce with universities, for example, and how to find out how the people on the panel, how our dementia affects us as individuals. And that's done before the research group starts, so that they know what affects us. For example, I get distracted by noises. Some people, if they have something to say, need to say it there and then. Some people can't read what's in the chat box. All of these things are so important, but these things need to be done before we start off. And that's another thing that we do with the webinars. We know each other well enough to know if somebody needs to speak first, we let them go first, etc.
Thanks, Chris. Andy Woodhead on chat has made a very, very good point, which I think is worth sharing. And that's that honesty is so important. That comes across really, really strongly in each of the webinars, that everyone feels a safe space. I think it was Nigel who talked about safe space earlier on. It feels like it's a safe space for people to be honest and say what they really think. And that comes across so strongly, and that makes the webinar so much more powerful, because you know you do believe that people can be themselves in this space, and that's really, really good. Joy.
Yeah, I think that goes for our listeners as well, that they can feel safe to engage in topics that they might not necessarily want to engage with their families and friends. So giving that opportunity, I think, is important in whatever webinar we do.
Absolutely, absolutely. Chris, is your hand still up from last time, or you've got nothing else?
No, it's a new one.
Right, good.
I think along with honesty is kindness. And I think that we're all kind people. And I can remember somebody saying to me a long time ago that a person living with dementia may not remember where they went yesterday, who they were with, or what they did, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And we tend to make that the core of our webinars as well, is that we want people to feel kindness. We want people to feel that they matter to us and they matter to a lot of other people. Especially, often I've thought about people who are further along their dementia journey, because a lot of people forget there's a beginning, a middle and an end on the dementia journey. And I often wonder about people who are towards the end of their journey. Maybe they can't communicate. And I'd love to be able to get inside somebody's head just to see what goes on, but none of us can ever do that. But I'm always mindful to be kind, because even though they could maybe not able to talk back to us, they can very much often hear what we're saying. And if we say kind words and we speak kind things, then that will make a difference to everybody.
That's so too, Chris. The first lesson I learned after my mum was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease back in 2009, and her memory of events became clouded, and she stuck with me for my late father a lot. And I knew, very quickly learned not to challenge her on that, just to go with it, because and to live in her reality, if you like, because that's where she was. And it was the most important lesson I ever learned, and it stayed with me now. And as you say, Chris, it comes down to kindness. It comes down to how you make people feel, which is a great lesson for everyone in everyday life. Let's face it, but particularly in this area. Nigel.
Yeah, I just want to actually, first off, enhance what Chris has said. Not enhance it, but support what Chris has said. Just because people can't speak doesn't mean they haven't got a voice of some description or other. And I think it's fair to say that I shared this with you loads and loads of times, guys, that I actually, it causes me sleepless nights how we capture the voices of people who've lost their voice. And I think it can be done. But I don't think it's for us to do it. I think it's just to encourage other people to look at that way. And the other thing I want to bring up is if you go in the chat, Steve Kennedy has written quite a lengthy piece on how important it's been to him during lockdown to have somewhere to go, i.e. Zoom meetings. He also says that simply because we have a diagnosis of dementia doesn't mean that we have nothing to contribute and we can still be an asset. I am still me with either help or time. I can still be very much an asset to society, and I think that's absolutely true. I think with dementia, it's almost a deficit agenda sometimes, because I think the medical model is so big and so influential in dementia, and it really doesn't fit kindly with me, because they concentrate on what's gone, not what's still there. Part of the successes of these webinars is to break that stigma down, that we can produce, we can deliver, we have an ability, if the organization is right, to be very influential and effective on current thinking. There we are. That's all I got to say on that.
I think we'd probably all say hear to that, Nigel. Absolutely spot on the mark. Chris.
Sorry, it's just gone from my head. I'll come back if it comes back to me.
Okay, Joy.
Yeah, I should probably know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway. What sort of feedback do we have after the webinars in how people have benefited from the webinar? I imagine that there is some feedback that comes through to James or Nigel, but it would be nice to know how people are benefiting.
Every time we have an all-female panel, the feedback increases. I don't know why that is, but it happens. We had one on bereavement. Remember the one on bereavement?
Mm.
And he went, you know, I had loads and loads of people mailing me, which I've kept and which I'll share with you sort of when we have a party of a 200,000th.
Lesson to be learned, Nigel, girl power.
Sorry?
Lesson to
Well,
be learned.
Well, I think you know it's been. I got to say that I've been quite subtle about this. Is that I think the steering group should reflect the levels of affection people who are affected by dementia, and women are disproportionately affected by dementia, and that's why there's more women on the steering group than men, and that's the way it will be while I'm still chair. Somebody else might have a different view. But I do think it has to reflect the current issues that face people on a day-to-day basis. And I think one thing I really want to talk about quickly is how proud I am and how in awe I am of the people that come along to our webinars, including you guys. I've never seen such bravery. Never seen such bravery. People for the first time coming on saying in public things which are very private to them. Now, I think that the one thing we never take account of is the bravery of people with dementia. I think the strength of character or the depth of character may be endless. I just think we just touch the top really in our webinars. I am so in awe of everybody who comes on these webinars and speaks. Joy.
Yeah, I think that is partly, if not mainly, to do with acceptance. If we feel valued and accepted, we're more likely to contribute to the webinars and contribute to the topics.
It's all about value, isn't it, Joy?
Mm-hmm.
All about that sense of value. And for those of you, and I think most people, a lot of people on the panel today were at the recent retreat in Birmingham. That was about the overwhelming feedback we got from that was the value that people felt as being part of that process. So I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Joy. Chris.
Just come back to me. What I was going to say is that we're told very, very often, you have dementia, you can't learn new things. That is not true. Just because we have dementia, we can learn new things. And every one of us sitting here now could say something new that we've learned. So don't write us off. Give us a challenge, give us something new to do. And we'll be able to, we'll try it. And it's so important that we concentrate on the things that we can still do and not on the things that we can no longer do. One of the things that I think that, and we've driven home about this so many times, is that when a diagnosis of dementia is delivered, it's all negativity. It's all, you have dementia, get your affairs in order. We need to be given some hope, even when we get our dementia diagnosis. And I gave a talk to a lot of top professionals from the Lewy Body Society, and I said, can you not please give us some hope when you give us a dementia diagnosis? And say there may be some things you can no longer do, but there's lots of things that you can still do. And this is the message that we don't get across very often. And this is the message people want to hear, that there is still hope and there are still things we can do and we can learn new things.
Yeah, focus on what's possible, not what's impossible. That's really important. Mac, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the general perception out there needs to be looked at because, you know, like you said, there are things that we've lost. This disease has taken so much away from us, but there are still abilities that we've retained. And I think that, you know, to answer to your question as to what Alzheimer's Society is going to take away from this, I would say that, and I would use my favorite TV detectives line, Columbo. He says on one of the episodes, he says, just look and listen and look. Because that is where you will learn about us, about our condition and our feelings. because yes, we might not be able to express them, but that doesn't mean that we don't feel them. And it doesn't mean that that feeling is not there with us for the rest of the day. So I believe that looking and listening and listening and looking is the key to all this.
And I think that's true, Mac. And I think having an open mind as well. And I think everyone who's been on a panel that I've seen on the webinars, and a lot of people in the chat have open minds. They want to learn more, and they want to share experiences. And that's really powerful. And it goes back to the point I think that Nigel made about bravery. I go back to my experience. I knew nothing about dementia when my mum was diagnosed back in 2009. And no one really talked about it then. I couldn't find the information. It was really, really difficult. This sort of thing didn't exist then. We've come a long, long way. We've still got a huge distance to go, but this is evidence of how far we have come in the last 10, 12 years. And maybe the pandemic, awful though it was, has had some benefits in terms of encouraging people and opening up conversations like this that wouldn't necessarily have happened otherwise. So maybe there's a positive to come out of all the suffering that's happened there. We've got about just over 10 minutes to go, and there's one question I want to ask. Lots of questions I had to ask that I haven't even got close to today. But one question I do want to ask is, what's next? You know, we couldn't have anticipated what would have happened when this started up 3 years ago during the pandemic. So what's next for you as a team, for this webinar, and for what might develop from this webinar?
Nigel, I think as our chair, you need to take the first shot at this.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks very much. I'll be guided by. I speak to a lot of people during the week, Duncan. I really do, inside this organisation and outside. And it can only be driven by the voices that are seldom heard. We need to talk about things like physical relationships. We need to talk about the changes within the family dynamics. We need to be brutally honest that dementia doesn't come with bells and whistles. It's a learning experience, as you alluded to, from the day it affects your family, and that it's not just an effect on the person with the diagnosis. Everybody in that person's circle is like a ripple effect. It can affect up to 10 or 15 people if there's 10 or 15 people in that circle. And we need to be more realistic about the services we provide. That you know, I believe the national strategies are brilliant. You know, I think they're good, but I think it's the locally run social enterprise like systems that are the most impactful service. The dementia cafes, the meeting centres, things like this, where people can go along and do this on a weekly basis. You know, talk about each other, talk to each other, discuss issues, and just have and carers can have a break from the day-to-day pressures of caring. I do think we need to be challenging as well. Some of the things that are being done for us on our behalf are not what we want. We didn't ask them that. We didn't ask for them. They happened out of organizational need or political expediency. And maybe we should have a webinar on why England hasn't got a 10-year strategy. You know, I mean, where everybody else has, England hasn't. I mean, that's shameful. And really, I'd like to work towards our 200,000th webinar, and on that say, listen, we're still here, we've still got something to say, and we're still relevant. And I think we've proven the relevancy. We've proven the resistance, and I think we've proven that we can be sustainable over a long period of time. There's an old gypsy saying, which, you know, I'm from a Romany background, and the saying is, you can go faster on your own, but you go further with other people. And I think that's something we should bear in mind.
Joy, and then Chris.
Yeah, I think in some respects we need to continue doing what we have been doing. Obviously, there's room for improvement, but just continue to be looking out for each other, and not losing sight of the fact that we on the steering group and part of Three Nations, we need to be cared for as well, along with the people we are connecting with.
And that brings us back to the sense, I forget who used the word family earlier on, it may even be you, Joy. There is a sense of family about this group, and we all need families, don't we? Chris?
Yeah, I mean, if you'd have asked us when we first thought of this idea to do the webinars, we wouldn't still be running them at this point, because we said it was just for as long as lockdown was on, and they're still going. And I believe that they're still going because there's still a need for them, and we must be getting something right. So as long as people want our webinars, our aim is to keep delivering them. And if people want us to talk about a certain topic, then suggest it to us, put it forward. And I think it's important to remember that dementia doesn't just affect the person receiving the diagnosis. It affects their whole family, their circle of friends. And, you know, Nigel mentioned we feel we need to do a little bit more around caregivers. But why not involve children and grandchildren maybe, and do something more around them? So there's lots and lots we could be doing, but it's what people want to hear, and we deliver it as best as we can. And it's funny because you mentioned about not knowing what to do, and my dad had Alzheimer's. So my grandmother also had Alzheimer's. So my first experience with dementia was with them. And when I think back, it wasn't that long ago when dementia wasn't spoken about. And anybody living with dementia, I can remember my grandmother saying, "Oh, Mrs. So-and-so down the road, she's gone doodle alley." And clearly that person had dementia, but there wasn't anything for them or anywhere for them to go. And it's not that long since Alzheimer's Society was set up. But we can only get better when we support one another. And I can remember my father was having hallucinations. And rather than say to him, I'll give an example of that. My dad said to me one day, he loved owls and he had owl ornaments all around the lounge. And one day he said to me, "Chris, the owls must come down." So I said, "Why is that, Dad?" He said, "Well, they're all having sex in front of me." Now, of course, that wasn't happening, but I didn't challenge my father because that was very real to him. What he was seeing was very real. And all I did was take down the owls. So sometimes I know from a caregiving perspective, your patients can be pushed and pushed and pushed. And it's nice to just think back and think, well, actually, it is real to that person. So how can I deal with it, showing it's real to them? And again, it's coming back to the honesty, caring, kindness.
That's a great point, Chris. I think what you just said brought to mind something that resonates with me, which was who cares for the carers in this process as well. The support needs to be there for them as well, and that may be a topic for well, it is a topic for another day. We're almost out of time. Anyone got any thoughts they'd like to close with? Anything that you hope that has made a mark? Anything that's particularly memorable about the webinar series?
I just like to say to all the membership out there and all the participants who've been on these this journey with us, that it is your webinars as well as ours. We wouldn't be able to do it without the guys who log in faithfully every Tuesdays. You were one of them, Duncan. It wouldn't have been possible. And the other thing I'd like to say is the hard work and the commitment that the other members of the steering group have given me to support me to help produce these webinars. You know, give yourselves a big pat on the back, guys. It's, as you know, I'm on the European Working Group. I'm on the World Dementia Council as well, and there's nothing like this in the world. Trust me, nothing. And from this, other things I've got because from these webinars, I had the idea in Wales to do a thing called PODS, which is positive outcomes in dementia spaces. And I said, you want to report on that because it was born out of my experiences here. So well done. Thank you so much for getting us to that magical figure. Duncan, thank you for sharing for today. Thank you so much for taking the time out.
It's been my pleasure. And when I said at the start, Nigel, I was a thrill to be asked. I really meant that because I've been a regular subscriber, as you know, right through the last 3 years. And I've learned so much and I'm continuing to learn. And that's one of the great things about being involved with it. You never stop learning. And there's still, we all have things to learn. We all have things to share. And it comes back to the point you made earlier about the bravery, Nigel, of people being prepared to share their experiences and be vulnerable in this space, but because it's a safe space. And that's what's made it so powerful. So thank you all today. Thank you for inviting me, but thank you all today for your contributions and everyone on the chat as well. We haven't really got to half the topics that were mentioned on the chat, just because the conversation has been so rich this morning. But thank you all very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to the next one, diverse activities for diverse people, which sounds fascinating. And I look forward to joining you for that.
And maybe we should have another webinar about webinars. Who knows? Give us some feedback.
Well, I think when we get to 150,000, I think we're entitled to rub our back, and then when we get to 200,000, we'll have a massive party somewhere. Yes.
And you'll still be there for that, Nigel, won't you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I keep on about this, but Adele Layton, I don't know where she got the idea from. And when she came, when I first spoke to her, I kind of bricked it a little bit, and I thought, oh dear me. And we did try and do it with a partner organization, and they said no, nobody would be interested in that. Well,
very eloquent as always, Nigel.
That's all I can say about that.
And when you look at the figures that we've had of viewing, I can remember Nigel saying he'd be happy if we had a maximum of 30 people attending or listening to our webinars. And we've way exceeded that. So
yeah.
onwards and upwards, I say.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you to you, Chris, to Julie, to Joy, to Mac, to Nigel, and to Keith, who was with us earlier on, for your contributions this morning. As I say, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to many more webinars in the future and how this will develop, because it's so powerful and there's so much more we can do. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Duncan. And thank you all the panelists, and thank you all the participants. We're back on the 2nd of May, 11 till 12, with a mixed bag of speakers on diverse activities for diverse people. It just means, just because we got dementia, don't mean that we like throwing tins of the Christmas cards. You know, we like to do other things. There are woodworkers, there are artists, there are people who are helping us have a much richer life, and that's what it's all about, really. Have a safe day. Bore da chi. Good morning, you all, and thank you so much. Bye-bye now.